Guadalajara, Mexico, February 12, 2023. The morning sun barely filters through the curtains when 4-year-old Diego Ramirez sits up in his bed, eyes wide with terror, screaming words that freeze his mother's blood. They threw me from the tall building. The men in suits were very angry. I couldn't breathe in the water. Carmen Ramirez rushes to her son's room, heart pounding. What she finds leaves her completely paralyzed. Diego isn't crying like a frightened child. His small face carries an expression of profound sadness, as if he's carrying the weight of memories that don't belong to him. "Mom, why did they hurt me? I was only trying to help the people in the factory. I had a wife and 2 little girls." Carmen drops to her knees beside the bed. Her 4-year-old son, who can barely tie his shoes, is speaking with the gravity of an adult who has lived through unimaginable trauma. The child looks directly into her eyes and whispers something that will haunt her forever. "I remember my name from before. I was Roberto Hernandez, and I died on March 15, 1987. You're about to hear the most documented and scientifically verified case of child reincarnation ever recorded in Mexico. A story that will challenge everything you believe about death, memory, and the continuation of human consciousness. Because what started as a mother's concern about her son's nightmares would become the most thorough investigation ever conducted by Mexican researchers into the impossible phenomenon of past life memories. And what they discovered would shake the foundations of everything we thought we knew about life after death. The weeks following that first terrifying morning transformed the Ramirez household into something unrecognizable. Diego, who had always been a typical 4-year-old obsessed with cartoon characters and toy cars, suddenly developed behaviors that left his parents questioning their sanity. During breakfast, he would push away his food and ask for coffee, black, just like I used to drink at the factory. When his father, Miguel Ramirez, tried to explain that children don't drink coffee, Diego looked at him with eyes that seemed decades older than his face. But it wasn't just the coffee. Diego began drawing detailed pictures that no 4-year-old should be capable of creating. Industrial machinery, factory layouts, architectural blueprints with precise measurements and technical specifications. His small hands moved across the paper with confident strokes, creating images that looked like the work of an experienced engineer. When Carmen asked him what he was drawing, Diego replied with casual certainty, "These are the machines from my factory. I designed the safety systems, but the bosses didn't want to spend money on worker protection." The most disturbing incident occurred 3 weeks after the first nightmare. Miguel had left for work early, and Carmen was preparing Diego's breakfast when she heard him talking to someone in the living room. But when she looked, her son was alone, standing in front of the blank television screen, having what appeared to be a heated argument with an invisible person. "No, senor, I won't stay quiet. The workers have the right to know about the chemical leaks. You can't threaten my family." Carmen approached slowly, recording everything on her phone. Diego's voice had changed completely. It was deeper, more authoritative, carrying the confidence of a man defending his principles. When he finally noticed his mother watching, the child's expression shifted back to normal, but his words remained chilling. "Mom, the bad men at my work are going to hurt me because I told the truth about the dangerous chemicals. They said they would make me disappear." That evening, Carmen made a decision that would change their lives forever. She called her brother-in-law, Dr. Eduardo Ramirez, a psychiatrist at the University of Guadalajara. Eduardo had always been skeptical of supernatural claims, but when he heard the recordings Carmen had made, his scientific curiosity was ignited. "The child is displaying knowledge and emotional patterns completely inconsistent with his age and life experience," he told Carmen over the phone. "We need to document everything systematically." Dr. Eduardo began visiting the house 3 times a week, equipped with professional recording equipment and psychological evaluation tools. What he documented over the following months would eventually be submitted to the International Institute for Reincarnation Research in Virginia, becoming the first Mexican case to meet their rigorous scientific standards for investigation. During his first formal interview with Diego, conducted on March 8, 2023, Dr. Eduardo asked the child to describe his previous life in detail. Diego sat in a chair that was too large for him, his feet dangling inches from the floor, and began speaking with a clarity that sent chills through everyone present. My name was Roberto Hernandez Gutierrez. I was born on June 22, 1952, in Guadalajara. I studied chemical engineering at the University of Guadalajara and graduated in 1975. I worked at Químicos Industriales del Bajío for 12 years as head of safety operations. Dr. Eduardo paused the recording. The level of specificity was unprecedented. Diego had provided dates, full names, educational background, and employment history, with the precision of someone reciting their own resume. But the child wasn't finished. I lived on Calle Libertad 847 with my wife Patricia and my daughters Ana and Sofia. Ana was 6 and Sofia was 4 when I died. I drove a blue 1982 Chevrolet Malibu, license plate JAL456B. The psychiatrist felt his hands tremble as he wrote down every detail. These weren't the vague, dreamlike recollections typical of children's fantasies. These were concrete, verifiable facts that could be investigated and confirmed or disproven. Over the following weeks, Dr. Eduardo began the painstaking process of verification, starting with public records from the Guadalajara Civil Registry. What he found defied all logical explanation. Roberto Hernandez Gutierrez had indeed existed. Born June 22, 1952. Graduated from the University of Guadalajara in 1975 with a degree in chemical engineering. Married to Patricia Morales in 1978. Father of 2 daughters, Ana and Sofia. The address on Calle Libertad was confirmed through property records. Even the vehicle registration matched perfectly. But the most shocking discovery came when Dr. Eduardo located newspaper archives from March 1987. On March 16, 1987, the Guadalajara newspaper El Informador published a small article on page 7. Industrial Safety Inspector found dead. The body of Roberto Hernandez Gutierrez, 34, was discovered in the Lerma River yesterday morning. Police are investigating the circumstances surrounding his death, which occurred after Hernandez had filed several safety violation reports against his employer, Químicos Industriales del Bajío. Dr. Eduardo stared at the newspaper clipping until his eyes burned. Diego had claimed to die on March 15, 1987. The newspaper confirmed Roberto's body was found on March 16th. The timeline matched perfectly. But there was more. The article mentioned that Roberto had recently filed safety reports about chemical violations at his workplace. Exactly what Diego had described during his invisible conversation in front of the television. Armed with this information, Dr. Eduardo made contact with Patricia Morales, Roberto's widow, who was now 67 years old and living in Mexico City. The phone conversation that followed would be recorded as one of the most emotionally charged moments in reincarnation research history. When Dr. Eduardo explained the situation and played recordings of Diego's statements, Patricia broke down completely. "That's him," she sobbed through the phone. "That's exactly how Roberto spoke. He used those same expressions, that same tone when he talked about work safety. But how is this possible? How can a child know things that only Roberto and I knew?" The investigation had reached a critical point. What started as a concerned mother's documentation of her son's nightmares had evolved into the most thoroughly researched case of its kind in Mexican history. But the most shocking revelations were yet to come, because Diego was about to lead them to discoveries that would forever change how science views the boundary between life and death. The phone call with Patricia Morales lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. Dr. Eduardo had prepared a list of specific questions that only Roberto's closest family members could answer, details that had never been published in newspapers or public records. When he asked about Roberto's personal habits, Patricia's voice trembled with recognition as Diego provided answers through his uncle's questioning. He always tapped his pen exactly 3 times on his desk before writing reports. Patricia confirmed, and he had a small scar on his left thumb from a childhood accident with broken glass. He was terrified of elevators after getting trapped in one as a teenager. So he always took the stairs, even to the 5th floor of his office building. Dr. Eduardo looked at Diego, who was playing with building blocks in the corner of the room, seemingly oblivious to the conversation. When asked about these details, the 4-year-old had responded with casual certainty. "Of course I was scared of elevators. I got stuck for 2 hours when I was 16. That's why I always walked up the stairs to my office. And yes, I had a scar right here," he said, pointing to the exact spot on his tiny thumb. But Patricia's voice broke completely when Dr. Eduardo played a recording of Diego humming a melody while drawing his factory diagrams. "That song," she whispered. "Roberto hummed that exact song every morning while shaving. It was an old bolero his father used to sing. There's no way a 4-year-old from a different family could know that tune." The breakthrough moment came when Patricia agreed to meet Diego in person. On April 3, 2023, she traveled from Mexico City to Guadalajara, accompanied by her daughters Ana and Sofia, now grown women in their 40s. The reunion was arranged at Dr. Eduardo's office, with multiple cameras documenting every second of the encounter. When Diego first saw Patricia, his reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He ran directly to her, wrapping his small arms around her legs while crying uncontrollably. "Patricia," he sobbed, using the diminutive form of her name that only Roberto had used. "I'm so sorry I left you and the girls. I tried to come back, but I couldn't find the way." Patricia collapsed into a chair, her entire body shaking. Ana and Sofia stood frozen, watching this impossible scene unfold. The child knew intimate details about their family life that had never been shared with anyone outside their immediate circle. He described the location of Patricia's secret jewelry box, hidden behind a loose brick in the bedroom wall. He recounted the exact words Roberto had spoken to Patricia the night before his death, private conversations that had never been recorded or shared. But the most chilling moment occurred when Diego looked directly at Ana and Sofia. He approached Ana first, his small face serious beyond his years. "You were so angry with me for missing your school play," he said quietly. "I promised I would be there, but I had to stay late at the factory to finish the safety report. I'm sorry, mija. I wanted to see you dance so badly." Ana burst into tears. That was true. She had been devastated when her father missed her performance, and she had carried guilt about their last argument for 36 years. No one except her immediate family knew about that conversation. Yet this 4-year-old boy was apologizing for a broken promise made decades before his birth. Dr. Eduardo realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in the scientific study of consciousness. But Diego wasn't finished revealing impossible memories. He turned to Sofia, the younger daughter, and his expression grew even more tender. "You used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms," he said softly. "You were so scared of the lightning. I would tell you stories about brave little princesses until you fell asleep. Do you remember the story about Princess Sophia who could talk to the clouds?" Sophia's legs gave out completely. That story had been their special secret, never shared with anyone else, not even her mother or sister. Her father had created it specifically for her, using her name as the protagonist. The story existed only in her childhood memories, yet this little boy was recounting details that only Roberto could have known. The session continued for 3 hours, with Diego revealing layer after layer of intimate family knowledge. He described the exact arrangement of furniture in their old house, the hiding place where Roberto kept his important documents, even the specific words of affection he used with each family member. Every detail was confirmed as absolutely accurate by Patricia and her daughters. But the investigation was about to take an even more extraordinary turn. Dr. Eduardo had arranged for Diego to visit the locations from Roberto's life, starting with the house on Calle Libertad, where the family had lived in 1987. The current owners, unaware of the situation, had agreed to allow a brief visit for what they believed was a historical research project. When Diego stepped out of the car in front of the house, his behavior changed completely. He walked directly to a specific spot in the front yard and knelt down, touching the ground with reverence. "This is where I planted the rose bush for Patricia's birthday in 1986, he said quietly. "The red roses, because they were her favorites." The current homeowner, Maria Santos, overheard the comment and approached with curiosity. "There was indeed an old rose bush in that exact location when we bought the house," she confirmed. "The previous owners told us it had been planted by the husband as a surprise for his wife, but we removed it years ago during renovation." Diego then walked to the front door and pointed to a small mark near the frame. "I made that scratch with my keys one night when I came home late from work," he explained. "Patricia was upset because I had missed dinner again. The scratch was still there, barely visible but exactly where he had indicated." Inside the house, Diego navigated the rooms as if he had lived there all his life. He went directly to what had been Roberto and Patricia's bedroom and pointed to a specific corner. The bed was right there, facing the window so Patricia could see the garden when she woke up. And there, he pointed to another corner, was my desk where I worked on safety reports at night. Maria Santos confirmed that the room layout matched exactly what Diego had described, despite the fact that the house had been completely remodeled twice since 1987. The 4-year-old was describing architectural details and furniture arrangements that no longer existed, yet his descriptions matched the original floor plans perfectly. But the most significant moment of the house visit occurred when Diego approached a closet in what had been the master bedroom. "Behind this wall," he said with certainty, "Roberto hid important papers about the chemical problems at the factory, the documents that got him killed." Dr. Eduardo felt his pulse quicken. If Diego was correct, this could provide crucial evidence about Roberto's death that had never been investigated. With the current owner's permission, they examined the wall carefully. What they found would transform this case from a study of reincarnation into a criminal investigation that would expose decades-old secrets and corporate cover-ups. Behind the false wall panel, exactly where Diego had indicated, they discovered a metal document box that had remained hidden for 36 years. The current homeowner stared in disbelief as Dr. Eduardo carefully extracted the container. Inside were dozens of typed reports, photographs, and handwritten notes, all bearing Roberto Hernandez's signature and dated between January and March 1987. The documents painted a horrifying picture of systematic cover-ups and worker endangerment at Químicos Industriales del Bajío. Roberto's reports detailed illegal dumping of toxic chemicals into local water sources, falsified safety inspections, and deliberate exposure of workers to carcinogenic substances. But most disturbing were the threatening letters Roberto had received from company executives, warning him to stop his investigations or face serious consequences. One letter, dated March 10, 1987, just 5 days before Roberto's death, was particularly chilling. "Mr. Hernandez, your continued interference in company operations has been noted by upper management. We strongly advise you to reconsider your position before irreversible actions become necessary. Your family's well-being depends on your cooperation." Diego looked at the documents with recognition that froze everyone present. "Those are the papers I was hiding from the bad men," he said matter-of-factly. "They said they would hurt Patricia and the girls if I didn't stop telling people about the poison in the water. That's why I had to hide them where nobody would look." Dr. Eduardo immediately contacted the authorities. Within hours, the Guadalajara prosecutor's office had reopened Roberto Hernandez's case as a suspected homicide. The documents provided evidence of corporate malfeasance that had been covered up for decades, but they also raised disturbing questions about how Diego could have known their exact location. The investigation expanded when Diego mentioned other hidden evidence. "At my office in the factory," he told Dr. Eduardo, I kept copies of everything in a secret compartment behind the filing cabinet. The combination to my office safe was Patricia's birthday backwards, plus our anniversary year. These were details that had never been recorded anywhere. Information that died with Roberto in 1987. Factory records showed that Roberto's office had indeed been sealed after his death and later converted to storage space. With legal authorization, investigators entered the building and found the areas Diego had described. Behind a filing cabinet that hadn't been moved in 36 years, they discovered another cache of documents that corroborated everything Diego had revealed. The safe combination worked perfectly. Inside were additional safety reports, photographs of illegal chemical dumps, and most shocking of all, a detailed letter Roberto had written to Patricia just days before his death. The letter, never sent, described his growing fear that company executives were planning to silence him permanently. "I've hidden evidence in multiple locations," the letter read. "If something happens to me, tell the authorities to look behind our bedroom wall and in my office. The truth must not die with me." Patricia wept as the letter was read aloud. Roberto had never mentioned any hidden documents to her before his death, yet somehow their existence had been preserved in the memories of a 4-year-old boy born 16 years later. The implications were staggering, but Diego wasn't finished revealing secrets that had been buried with Roberto. During another session with Dr. Eduardo, Diego began describing the events of March 15, 1987, with terrifying precision. "They came to my office at night," he said, his small voice carrying the weight of adult fear. "3 men in dark suits. They said the boss wanted to see me on the roof to discuss my reports. I knew it was a trap, but I was afraid they would hurt my family if I didn't go." The child's description of his final moments was heartbreaking in its clarity. "They pushed me over the edge," he whispered. "I fell into the water below. It was so cold, and I couldn't swim because my hands were tied. I remember thinking about Patricia and the girls as everything went dark. I wanted to tell them I loved them one more time." Dr. Eduardo compared Diego's account with the original police reports from 1987. The official investigation had concluded that Roberto accidentally fell into the Lerma River while working late at the factory. No witnesses, no signs of struggle, case closed within 2 weeks. But Diego's memories suggested a very different scenario, one that aligned with the threatening letters found in the hidden document cache. The breakthrough came when Diego mentioned a specific detail that had never appeared in any official record. "Before they pushed me, one of the men dropped his wallet. It fell between the roof and the building wall. His name was on his identification card inside. The man's name was Carlos Mendoza, and he worked for the company owners." Investigators returned to the factory building, now abandoned and scheduled for demolition. Using Diego's precise directions, they located the narrow gap between the roof and the outer wall. Incredibly, after 36 years of weather and decay, they found the remains of a leather wallet wedged exactly where Diego had indicated. Inside the deteriorated wallet was a company identification card for Carlos Mendoza, listed as head of security for Químicos Industriales del Bajío. The card was dated 1987, and cross-referencing with employment records showed that Mendoza had worked for the company from 1985 to 1988 before mysteriously relocating to another state. Phone records from March 1987 revealed multiple calls between Mendoza and company executives in the days leading up to Roberto's death. The evidence was overwhelming, but Carlos Mendoza had died in 2015, taking his secrets to the grave. However, Diego provided another crucial detail that led investigators to a living witness. The man who drove the car that night was named Francisco Reyes, he told Dr. Eduardo. He felt bad about what happened. I could see it in his eyes. He kept saying he didn't know they were going to kill me, that he thought they were just going to scare me. Police located Francisco Reyes, now 78 years old and living in a nursing home in Tijuana. When confronted with the evidence and Diego's impossible knowledge of events, The elderly man broke down and confessed his role in Roberto's murder. "We were just supposed to intimidate him," Reyes sobbed during his recorded confession. "But when we got to the roof, Mendoza and the other guy said they had new orders. They said Roberto knew too much and would never stop causing problems." The confession provided the final piece of evidence needed to officially reclassify Roberto Hernandez's death as homicide. More importantly, it validated every detail Diego had described about his final moments, information that no living person should have been able to access. The case had evolved from a study of reincarnation into the solution of a 36-year-old murder. But the investigation revealed something even more extraordinary. Diego began describing other memories from Roberto's life that went beyond the circumstances of his death. He talked about Roberto's childhood, his relationship with his parents, his dreams and aspirations, even intimate moments with Patricia that had never been shared with anyone else. During one particularly emotional session, Diego looked directly at Patricia and said, "Do you remember our first dance at your cousin's wedding? You were wearing the blue dress with little flowers. I stepped on your feet 3 times, but you laughed and said you didn't mind. That night I knew I was going to marry you." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. That memory was sacred to her, something she had never told anyone, not even her daughters. It was the moment she had fallen in love with Roberto, a private memory that existed only in her heart. Yet this 4-year-old boy was describing it with perfect accuracy, down to the color of her dress and the number of times Roberto had stepped on her feet. The sessions continued for months, with Diego revealing layer after layer of Roberto's memories. He described family vacations, work colleagues, favorite foods, childhood fears, and dreams for the future. Every detail was verified as accurate by family members and friends who had known Roberto personally. The evidence was so overwhelming that even the most skeptical researchers had to acknowledge they were witnessing something unprecedented. Dr. Eduardo compiled over 400 hours of recorded interviews, thousands of pages of documentation, and dozens of verified facts that Diego could not have known through normal means. The case file was submitted to international research institutions and became the subject of intense scientific scrutiny. Neurologists, psychiatrists, and consciousness researchers from around the world traveled to Guadalajara to study Diego and attempt to find conventional explanations for his impossible knowledge. But perhaps the most profound impact was on Roberto's family. Patricia, Ana, and Sofia found a healing they had never expected. Through Diego's memories, they were able to say goodbye to Roberto properly, to understand his final days, and to know with certainty that his love for them had transcended death itself. The little boy had given them something they thought was lost forever, the opportunity to reconnect with a husband and father whose life had been cut tragically short. Yet questions remained that challenged everything science thought it knew about consciousness, memory, and the nature of human existence. How could a child access memories from a man who died 16 years before his birth? What mechanism allowed Roberto's experiences to survive death and resurface in Diego's young mind? And most disturbing of all, if this case was genuine, what did it mean for humanity's understanding of life, death, and whatever lies beyond? The scientific community's response to Diego's case was immediate and intense. Dr. James Patterson, director of the Institute for Consciousness Studies at the University of Virginia, arrived in Guadalajara just 2 weeks after the criminal evidence was discovered. Patterson had spent 25 years investigating cases of alleged reincarnation, and his rigorous scientific protocols had debunked hundreds of fraudulent claims. But when he reviewed Dr. Eduardo's documentation, he knew this case was different. Patterson brought with him a team of specialists, including Dr. Sarah Chen, a neurologist from Johns Hopkins, and Dr. Michael Kowalski, a forensic psychologist who specialized in detecting false memories in children. Their first meeting with Diego was scheduled for May 15, 2023, under controlled laboratory conditions at the University of Guadalajara's Psychology Department. What they witnessed would challenge their most fundamental assumptions about human consciousness. The testing began with simple questions designed to establish baseline responses. Diego answered normally, displaying the typical attention span and vocabulary of a 4-year-old. But when Dr. Patterson shifted the conversation to Roberto's memories, the transformation was immediate and startling. The child's posture changed. His voice deepened slightly, and his eyes took on a focus that seemed decades beyond his years. Dr. Chen monitored Diego's brain activity using portable EEOG equipment throughout the session. When discussing his current life as Diego, the readings showed normal patterns for a child his age, but the moment he began recounting Roberto's memories, something extraordinary happened. The brain waves shifted to patterns typically seen in adults accessing long-term memories, with increased activity in regions associated with emotional processing and autobiographical recall. Even more disturbing was what happened when Diego described Roberto's final moments. His brain activity spiked dramatically in areas linked to trauma processing, showing responses identical to those observed in adult PTSD patients reliving traumatic experiences. Dr. Chen had never seen such patterns in a 4-year-old child, particularly one who should have no traumatic memories to access. Dr. Kowalski attempted to find inconsistencies in Diego's statements by asking increasingly specific questions about Roberto's life. He inquired about co-workers' names, the layout of the factory, technical details about chemical processes, even the contents of Roberto's desk drawers. Diego answered every question with casual confidence, providing information that was later verified through employment records and interviews with surviving colleagues. The most compelling test came when Dr. Patterson presented Diego with photographs from Roberto's personal collection, images that had never been published or shared outside the family. Without hesitation, Diego identified everyone in the pictures, recalled when and where each photo was taken, and even described events that had occurred before or after the camera captured the moment. One photograph showed Roberto with several co-workers at a company Christmas party in 1985. Diego looked at the image for barely 3 seconds before pointing to each person and providing their names, job titles, and personal details. "That's Manuel from accounting," he said, pointing to a man in the background. "He always brought his wife's tamales to share during lunch breaks. And there's Dr. Morales, the company chemist, who helped me understand why the workers were getting sick from the chemical exposure." Dr. Patterson contacted Manuel Ruiz, the accountant mentioned by Diego, who was now retired and living in Puerto Vallarta. The elderly man was stunned when told about Diego's statements. "Nobody remembers those details," Ruiz said over the phone. "My wife did make tamales for the office, but that was such a small thing. How could a child know about something so specific from before he was born?" The investigation expanded when Diego mentioned technical details about chemical manufacturing that no 4-year-old could possibly understand. He described complex molecular structures, industrial safety protocols, and environmental contamination processes with the expertise of a trained chemical engineer. Dr. Patterson arranged for Professor Antonio Vega, head of the Chemical Engineering Department at the University of Guadalajara, to test Diego's knowledge. The session was conducted in Professor Vega's laboratory, surrounded by equipment and chemical diagrams that would be meaningless to most adults, let alone a preschool child. But when shown molecular structures on a whiteboard, Diego immediately identified each compound and explained their potential health effects. "That one causes liver damage if you breathe it for too long," he said, pointing to a complex hydrocarbon chain. "We had a leak in reactor 3 that exposed 6 workers to that chemical. They all got sick within 2 months." Professor Vega checked factory medical records from 1987 and found exactly what Diego had described. 6 workers from Reactor 3 had indeed been hospitalized with liver complications between April and June of that year, just as Diego had stated. The medical reports had been classified confidential and sealed by the company, yet somehow this information existed in the memories of a 4-year-old child. Today, Diego lives a normal life in Guadalajara, playing with toys and attending preschool like any other child. But his impossible memories solved a murder, reunited a grieving family with their lost loved one, and provided the most documented evidence of reincarnation ever recorded. Science still cannot explain how consciousness survives death or why certain souls return with their memories intact. But one thing remains undeniably clear: death may not be the end we once believed it to be.